We're continuing on our journey up in the high Arctic to cross the Barents Sea and get to Svalbard. After making our way from Scotland and crossing the North Sea to Norway, we made our way up the Norwegian coast through Lofoten to the top of the country. We waved goodbye to the stunning scenery we'd encountered from mainland Norway and headed further north for a 250-mile passage to the majestic and isolated island of Bjornøya, otherwise known as Bear Island.
Here we waited for the weather to fill in while exploring the shore and the amazing sea cliff caves we found. And now we're continuing sailing the remaining 300 miles, aiming for Longyearbyen, the main town on Svalbard. From there we'll be trying to get as far north as we possibly can, hopefully up to 80 degrees of latitude, only 600 miles from the North Pole.
The wind had built steadily from the southeast, and though there was some swell from the west making things a little rolly, it still made for some good sailing without being too uncomfortable. We'd installed bearing roller cars on the mast when we had the new sails made, and this had made it much easier for us to be able to reef the mainsail while sailing downwind. As having to change course to head upwind to be able to put a reef in can be pretty dangerous in a building sea state, and being able to do this certainly makes things easy for us, and it always feels a lot safer.
Yeah!
As we near the southern tip of Svalbard, we get our first glimpse of the island. At this point we're still staying well offshore, and so it's just the occasional sighting through the cloud.
We had the option to take a turn for the shore at this point, to get some rest at an anchorage in one of the southern fjords. The forecast for this area was showing it was likely to be more low-lying cloud and heavy rain for the next few days. We wouldn't be able to venture ashore anyway, as we didn't have a firearm with us, so we continued the remaining 150 miles to our destination. There's a requirement to carry a firearm for bear protection when travelling anywhere on shore in Svalbard, with the exception of the town centres, and we're planning on hiring a rifle when we get to Longyearbyen.
As we turn inshore into the island's large central fjord of Eastfjorden, the wind and swell calms, and we cruise in the last 30 miles and arrive at Longyearbyen at 4 in the morning. There's a single long dock available for yachts, and that was busy when we arrived. We ended up rafting to another boat, and most others were 3 boats deep in a pretty tight space.
As we expected, there was quite a few larger aluminium and steel expedition yachts up here, along with the big commercial vessels.
There were a few boats here that we recognised, some that had set off from Tromsø a few days before we did, and others that we'd seen or met on our trip up the Norwegian coast.
We weren't the smallest or the only fiberglass boat, so it gave us some confidence that we might not be that stupid after all.
Now, Longyearbyen can't by any stretch of the imagination be described as a picturesque town, but being able to look at pretty buildings is not why anyone's here. Originally a mining town and supply post, the town has grown a lot over the last few years with the huge increase in tourism, and although it's not quite the most northern town in the world, it's close to it, and so it holds claim to most of the world's most northern superlatives, which now includes the university and a brewery.
There's no visa requirements to visit or work on the island, so the living and working population here is quite varied. There's no sales tax or VAT on anything here, though due to the additional costs of being in such a remote location, it doesn't exactly make things cheap, but they certainly feel that way after coming from Norway.
We rested up for a few days as we got to grips with our new surroundings and provisioned the boat for the next few weeks of relative isolation further up north. And after a customary rig inspection and checking over all our communication and survival equipment, the boat seemed ready. We just needed to head back into town to collect one last thing. As we left Longyearbyen, we headed a short 25 miles across the fjord to anchor near one of the glaciers there, before making our way up the coast via the world's most northern town of Ny Alesund and then further north.
As within Norway, sailing in any fjord you usually get the wind either coming straight at you or from straight behind you, on your nose or up your arse. As we came out of Adventfjorden, where Longyearbyen is situated, we had 12 knots of wind from behind us, though we were prepared for this to increase as we came out into the main fjord. The forecast was for southeast winds around 15 knots, so we fully expected the wind to be from east to west along the fjord and to be upwards of 20 knots as we came out.
As we came out into the main fjord, the wind direction shifted as predicted and started to build in speed. Though instead of the 20 to 25 knots we'd anticipated, this quickly built to a pretty steady 38 knots and was gusting well into the 40s. So the lesson we learnt here was to inspect the topography much more closely when we were interpreting the weather forecast here in Svalbard, as those katabatic winds that you think you're expecting are going to be much stronger with that warmer wind passing over the ice of the glaciers.
3 hours later, once in the lee of the fjord of Trighamnia, it all quickly seemed like a distant memory. This is the first glacier we've seen that flows right down into the water, with ice carving directly into the fjord. The following day, we left the main fjord of Isfjorden and headed further up the coast.
If you watched our earlier video when we left Norway, you might recall that I mentioned that our fridge had stopped working, so one of the jobs on our list was to collect some glacier ice to put in it so we could use it as an ice box. And well, it'd be rude not to get some anyway to put with the rum. After we'd been asleep for a few hours, we were woken up by a couple of thumps on the hull. We checked this out and saw it was just some smaller bits of ice and nothing to worry about, though we did notice that there were a few larger bits heading our way. So out came the buggy bit pokey stick.
The pole's really heavy as well. There's loads of rumbling. I think it's missed us. The waters around Svalbard are not that tidal, though the tide it does have makes a difference to the flow of the ice into and out of the fjords. A combination of wind and tide will either push the ice up against the glacier or out into the fjord. This means ice can quickly fill small bays and anchorages, making it difficult or even impossible to leave. And as there was now a light breeze from the northeast pushing some bigger bits our way, we decided to raise the anchor and move on.
This is Ny Alesund, and this is actually the world's most northern town. And that is the world's most northerly pub. It's only open on a Saturday night and no photographs or videos are allowed inside. So what happens in Ny Alesund stays in Ny Alesund. And after we spent a night in there with them all, I can see why they'd want to keep it that way.
This is another ex-mining town that's now populated with around 120 people in summer and about 30 in winter. These are mainly scientists and researchers, with communication and marine environmental studies being their primary focus. Amundsen used this location as a base for his airship attempts to reach the North Pole in the 1920s, and they have a small free museum showcasing the history.
Heading further north again, we were treated to this encounter by a juvenile Minky whale. Although only brief, it was our first close quarter sighting of a whale on this trip, and so it felt quite special.
The small bay here in the fjord has previously been home to several groups of whalers and trappers from the 17 and 1800s. The roped off area you can see is to help mark some of the 130 graves that can be found here. These graves and all the other buildings and artefacts on Svalbard dating pre-1945 have been designated as being of significant cultural interest and are now protected from anyone removing anything from these sites.
He puked all over me. No, he landed on my head and I went like that and I knocked it off.
It's not the bear you need to be worried about.
While we were here, we met some officials from the Seasilman, which is the Svalbard Governor's Office. Think of them as two hardcore Arctic park rangers in a high-speed rib with rifles and sidearms. And yes, they wanted to see our firearm and travel permits.
They did let us know that there'd been no reported bear sightings for 2 days in the area, but as there are more polar bears on Svalbard than people, the danger to personal safety is very real, and the need to be vigilant is crucial.
We found the remains of Dave, whose final words were, "What polar bear?"
The requirements had changed recently regarding the permits necessary to hire and carry firearms, as you now have to be able to provide documentation showing some form of training. This went alongside new changes to the application for the permit required to be able to travel outside of the main tourist area, which you now have to pre-apply for and provide an itinerary. We met a couple of vessels that weren't prepared for these changes, and they had to change their plans as they couldn't hire a rifle or get the permit to travel further north than Longyearbyen. Watch the next video where we'll be sailing up past 80 degrees north and we get to encounter all of the Arctic wildlife we ever dreamed of getting to see while being here.